Welcome back to the 6 key ingredients of becoming a successful Pythonista. And today I want to show you how to start a project in Python. Use Git for version control so you never lose any changes and you can actually start sharing your work with others. So we also tackle GitHub to do that, to share your code with other developers and work with branches so you can work on specific features in tandem with other developers and submit your code through a pull request. And that's all what I'm going to demo today. So let's dive straight in. So I'm here at GitHub with my account. If you don't have an account, pause the video and make an account now. You will need it as a developer. As they say, GitHub is your new resume as a developer. So I'm going to make a new repo. And we're going to make a script to traverse the RSS feed over podcast, because as the collection is growing, I want to see what podcasts, when did we talk about what. So PyBytes podcast, public repo, no README yet. Cool. So now I have a URL, which we're going to use in a bit. So first I'm going to make the project locally, and I'm going to use Poetry. And Poetry is a tool to orchestrate dependencies, packages, and it also can make your project structure. So I already have it installed on my system. If you're new to Poetry, get it on your OS with curl or the Windows equivalent, and then you should just have that in your path. So I'm going to do Poetry new, and I'm going to call this PyBytes podcast. And it's created a PyBytes podcast package, or well, project folder, and inside of that, it made a PyBytes podcast package. It also added a README RST, a TOML file, which I will discuss in a bit, and a test folder. And both the main package as well as the test folder are packages, thanks to Poetry adding init files. And it also made a test skeleton file. So in the TOML file, actually, this is not what I wanted. I definitely want to use the latest Python. So let me fix that right now. And PyTest, I think, is already at 5.2 at the very least. So let me fix those things first. So Poetry info, no, env info 2.7, very bad. So let's use Python 3.9. And upon choosing that Python version, it's going to make a virtual environment for me automatically. So Poetry, I don't have to fiddle with virtual environments at all. It's all done under the hood. Of course, if you don't want to use Poetry, you can always use Python -m venv and the location of the virtual environment. But I grew accustomed to Poetry because it takes so much complexity out of the equation, and it works pretty well. So now I'm also going to Poetry add some dependencies we're going to use. So first of all, I want feed parser, which is a library to parse feeds. And I'm going to add a dev dev dependency, PyTest, which we already had, but in the TOML file, I put a more recent version in. So I think we should be good. I'm not sure if we have the latest actually. Yeah, we have 5.4, which is really reasonable. So to run PyTest inside Poetry, I can do a Poetry run PyTest, and that should now run that skeleton file I mentioned before. And that file just imports the dunder version, which is provided by default. in the init file, and it just asserts that that has the same version as stated on the left. Cool. So we have a project. At this point, I can actually init a new Git repository. So I can do git init. That makes a .git folder, and that means that the project is under version control, but we have not added the files yet. So, by the way, so I'm using this alias. GS is git status. So these files I definitely want to have under version control, but right off the bat, I know that PyTest is going to create some PyCache folders, which I don't want to commit under version control. So I'm going to open my Git Ignore, and here I can specify patterns that will be ignored when I'm adding files to version control. So the SWP is a common Vim thing, swap files. And I definitely want to ignore PyCache folders. And the double star indicates that I want to do that recursively. So now I can do a git add dot, and that will add all the files to the staging area, which is the step before you actually commit it. So I'm just quickly checking if this is all I want. This is all legit. So I can do git commit, first commit. Now, these files are now under version control locally, but they're not yet on GitHub. So we made this repo, and now I can actually set that repo as a remote. So I can do git remote -v, and there's not a remote yet. So I can do add origin. So that's the name I'm giving to that remote repository. And I can just put in the link. So if I now run git remote -v again, that's now set up. And I can push the files by doing git push, name of the remote, and then the branch I'm pushing. So git push origin master. And to not have to specify origin master the whole time, I'm going to use -u. So if I do a help on push, the -u should be is the same as -- set upstream, and that sets the upstream for git pull status. Basically, that means by default, if I type git push to origin and push master. So I can just, for the subsequent pushes, I can just have a little less typing to do. Cool. So if I refresh this, the files are now in GitHub, which is cool. It does suggest to add a README, so it didn't discover my readme.rst. So I'm going to rename that to an MD. That's a commit. And by the way, my alias here, GCEME, is git add and git commit. So sometimes if I'm really sure what I want to commit, that there's no danger of adding too much, I do this shortcut just to add the files to the staging area and also commit them in one go. And I left the -m off of the commit command to go into my Vim editor. And my next commit is to actually add some content here. So this will be the PyBytes podcast searcher. And we want to a tool to browse the podcast's RSS feed. So again, I made a change, updated README, and I should be able to just git push. And because we did the -u before, it now knows that by default, I want to push to origin and I want to push my master branch. Again, if I refresh, this is there. Now say, so I actually have the script already written. So let me paste that in. Notice that Poetry will only make the package. It won't decide for me what to put in it. It only makes an init file in there, which makes it a package actually. But at this point, I'm responsible of adding one or more modules. So I'm going to make a search.py, and I'm going to add the code I've written already. Otherwise, this demo would be very long. I will quickly explain it though. So we have our RSS feed. Our podcast is hosted on Buzzsprout. We have the podcast base URL, which is where I actually want to, that's the link I want to use. I have an episode match. This is basically some placeholder text, which I will use, or some part of the output. I have a name tuple of episode, which has a title and a link attribute. And then I made a little class. And the reason I made a class was because I'm parsing in the feed, and I don't want to do that over and over again. So by encapsulating that in a class, I just have that that loading in of the RSS feed done once in the constructor, and then it's kind of cached, and I can just use it as long as that class or that instance of the class is alive. And I have some helpers to strip HTML and to convert a link from Buzzsprout to the real PyBites podcast. And the bulk, the meat of the class is the search method, which takes a term, goes through the entries of the RSS feed. And thanks to feed parser, that little module on PyPI, this is a one-liner. So this loads in the feed and makes a sensible data structure we can use, which makes it very easy. And I'm just going to match if the term, which I lowercased to have case insensitive matching, is in either the summary or the title. And if that's the case, I'm yielding an episode name tuple. So this is a little generator actually, and this is just giving me all the matching episodes that match. So the title or the description of the episode match what I'm searching for. Then I have a call dunder, which basically makes the class callable. So then when I make an instance here in main, I can just call the class, and then it's kind of the entry point to the class. So we go into an infinite loop. That's kind of the interactive part of the program, where the user is asked for a term, and then the matching happens, and then we print the matching episodes. So that's basically where all the pieces come together. And I have a if name equals main, that just calls the main. So if I do in poetry run Python, and I do it that way because if I just do Python, it will use my global one, but I want to use the one that's in poetry. So poetry knows to use the virtual environment it created. So we can actually use the feed parser dependency we pulled in. Then I can just run it like -m pybytes podcast dot search, and that should invoke the script. Yeah, search for episodes. So what episode did we talk about habits? Nice. 5, yeah, on 4 episodes. Where did we talk about mindset? Well, even more. Where did we do code reviewing on one? Tutorial paralysis, another good one. That was the first episode. And Q for quit. So nice script. Again, let's commit it. So edit search module, push that up. And that's straight on the master branch. So that got added. Now let's show how to do a branch. Like say you work on a feature, I'm going to add some test. So I can do git checkout -b testing. And that's actually a shortcut for doing git branch. So let me do the long format actually. Git branch testing, that creates the branch, and git checkout puts me on the branch. And git checkout -b is a shortcut to do those 2 steps in one go. So now I'm on the testing branch. So imagine like we have master, and now I branched off into a separate branch. So I can do work here on this testing branch, and the main branch can still move forward, and then later I merge it in. So that allows to have several developers work on the same code base in tandem. So we're going to add some testing here. So I'm going to make a test search.py. I already have the code because the point of this demo was not the actual coding, but more like the tooling around it. So I'm going to make a fixture to once and for all instantiate the feed searcher class. Normally you would mock out the call over the network to pick up the feed. I'm not too worried about that now, as the scope of the fixture is a module that happens once. So I just take this as a little end-to-end test, and I'm happy for the test to go over the network. That's fine for now. Then I have some parameterization going on to test different scenarios. So as you saw me using it from the CLI, I test for review, should give one episode. I test for mindset, it should give a whole bunch of episodes. I test for habit, also multiple matches. And if I search for procrastination, there was no hit for that. And then I pass those arguments into the actual test function, and I run my search method and compare actual to expected. And then I have two more tests for those little helpers. So for example, the get PyBytes link should convert this Buzzsprout link, which has an MP3 and some blob, into a clean PyBytes podcast URL. So I can run the test by doing poetry run pytest. And that runs. Of course, the previous test is still there, which was kind of not useful. So I'm just going to git remove that test. And now we should have 6 passing tests. Remove not useful test, add test for search module. Now, this commit sits on the testing branch, right? So what happens if I do a git push to origin, which is basically GitHub? Again, that's all defined with git remote. So origin, if I push to origin, the testing branch, GitHub is going to say like, okay, so testing, this branch is now ahead of the master branch, of the main branch. So what should I do? And the common thing to do is, and it actually offers you this opportunity, is to create a pull request for the testing branch to get it merged into master. So I can just use this URL. Actually, the web page already automatically detected that as well. I can check if I want to merge it into master, which in this case is the case, but sometimes you have a branch that has to go into another branch. So make sure that the base branch is correct. And then I can create a pull request. And now somebody on the team can actually review this code. So they can add comments on every single line of code, which is really awesome. And then the team member, as I'm an admin, I have that permission. But once they're happy with this code, they can do a merge. And at this point, the testing branch gets merged back into master. And master is now in sync. Now, locally, I'm still out of sync, right? Because here I have only that added search module commit. So now I have to do a pull. And I should get these changes back into master. I could have also do this manually locally by doing a git merge testing, which would have merged the testing changes into master. But as I did the merge on GitHub, I might as well do a git pull, which pulls in the remote master. So the master that's on GitHub or their main, now it's also called the main branch. So yeah, now I have those changes locally and there's not a difference between master and testing anymore. So that's kind of basically the Git flow. And then you can do this again. So you can now open a new branch for another feature, right? And start working, push that new branch up there and open the pull request. So that's kind of the Git flow simplified. And that's it. We made a new project using Poetry, which was tremendously helpful in setting up the structure. We wrote code, we wrote tests. The testing we did on a separate branch and pushed that branch to GitHub and opened a pull request. We merged in a pull request and got the changes back into master. That's the 80-20 of what you need to get started as a developer. You need to know how to create a project, to put it on a version control, and how to push code to GitHub for review, and how to then merge the branches into the main branch. That's mostly what you need to know. There's more to it, but this is the 80-20. So I hope this was helpful. And tomorrow we're going to see how we can push this package onto PyPI. And that's a huge deal, because then you really start to get into that mindset of open source, publishing your work, share it on PyPI. I mean, if your package is on PyPI, people can just pip install it or Poetry add it, and it just magically gets added to their project. So very excited, and I will show you that tomorrow. Thanks for watching.